Yeah, I have two.
Okay.
Well, good morning, everybody. When Nicole changes the slide, you will see our pictures. And we think by now you probably know who we are. Nicole and I have worked together for quite a few years on youth suicide prevention. And the thing that I would say to you about this morning's talk is that we really are bringing two perspectives to this. Those of you who were kind of on early, we are both licensed clinical social workers, so I go yay for social workers, but we do value other people as well. But Nicole is bringing you the in-person school perspective as the school counselor, and I'm bringing you sort of the theory perspective, and I'm also bringing you the lived experience perspective because I have a granddaughter who has been suicidal, and I've really kind of watched over the last week as she has gotten more and more challenged by the virtual half hybrid learning environment. And it's real clear to me that loss of social connection is so profoundly affecting her. And I'm sure that you see some kids who have that experience as well. So, we're really kind of coming at this from we're living it with you. And we would like to make this as helpful as we can. How we'd like to start is we're going to ask you a question to go into your chat. And this is the next slide, Nicole. We'd like you to tell us, have you taken Lifelines Intervention before? While this is intended to be a booster, what we've found in the other Lifelines booster sessions we've done is that there are some people who have never had any Lifelines. So we'd like to know that. And if you haven't had it, if you could let us know what school you're from, because we're going to be doing some updated, total programs starting the end of this month. The more folks who tell us they need it, the more we're going to add into that. And as Nicole said, that's why this evaluation data is so important, because we got to get more money. We want you to have this for free. We can clearly see the need for it. We think you can see it too. So if you could just kind of let us know where you are and where you're from very quickly, and I'll have Nicole kind of let me know when we can move on from your responding to that question.
Okay. I know it's hard. I know it's hard Monday, but let's chat it up. Good. Okay. Got a couple. We got mostly yeses. Only a couple right at this minute, but seems to be that a lot of people have had our training.
Great.
Which is great. Yep. Yes. Resounding yeses. So this is really awesome.
So know us. So one of the things I'm going to say to you, and this is really based on the introduction I just made, is that, we really are kind of highlighting some of the key parts of intervention and some of the things that we've changed. But it seems to me, as I just look at the landscape, that things are changing so dramatically and they're not going in a good direction for our kids. So what I would really like you to feel free to do at the end of this, when you do your post-test, because we've got a post-test too, is I'd really like it if you could kind of write in some of the suggestions you might have for additional information, because I don't know that we're covering it all. I know we're not covering it all. And I want to make sure that we really try to stay up with you and be as resourceful as we can as we move through the rest of this pandemic. So what we're going to cover today, which is in our next slide, is we're going to talk about some of the recent updates that we've made to Lifelines Intervention. And some of you may have had the training when we had the first edition of the book. Some of you may have had that second edition. And the reality is, even since that second edition, we've had to make updates to recognize the impact of COVID. One of the things I think that we learned as we did this through the years, the first edition of this came out somewhere in the mid 2000s. And when we put the first edition of intervention out, we didn't really say anything about ventilation and validation. you know, we were very naive in thinking, well, of course, everybody knows how to do that. And we learned that, you know, in graduate school 101. So we don't need to talk about that. And as we went through doing trainings around the country, we found that especially when you're dealing with kids who are saying that they wanted to die, that it can be really tricky to not dismiss that, to validate it, but not to, you know, gently provide an alternative. Um, and so this has really become one of the focuses in the new training that we're doing. And when we do this training in person or we do the all day training, we have a fairly, you know, significant group activity where you really take a look at responding to kids who are saying this. And we're going to give you a short version of that today. And I will say to you, it's always easy to do it when you don't have a relationship with a child. But as you know, as I've kind of admitted to y'all personally, you know, my granddaughter has been suicidal. And boy, when I had to ask her that question, I had to take such a deep breath and really sort of put my feelings way on the back burner. So I understand very personally how hard that question may be, and we're going to try to help you with that. The whole idea, just so you know where intervention came from, I would tell you that, you know, back in the mid 2000s, you know, one of the issues was there were very few national resources related to youth suicide assessment. Lifelines was the first school-based program for anything, for prevention, for intervention, for postvention. We were the first. And people started coming along with postvention, they came along with prevention, but no one has attempted to look at intervention in schools. And the programs that they've used for intervention in schools are pretty much programs that were designed for adults. And as someone who has worked with kids my entire practice history, which many of you know, having seen me do trainings 20 years ago, is a pretty long time, it always got me just so frustrated to somehow think that people thought that, you know, models that were designed for adults could just be thrown in for kids. And the second piece of what kind of got us when we put this together was that it was mental health clinicians often would go into schools and tell them what to do about making these assessments for kids who are at risk. And having spent almost 30 years in schools, never as a school person, you know, employee, always as a consultant, I just always kind of thought, you know, we have so much to learn from schools. They know so much more about this than we do. They're with kids all day. We see them, you know, for little bits and pieces. So we recognized that the model that you were going to use in the school had to be very different from the model you would use in a practice setting or an emergency department setting. You weren't a mental health clinic, but you were often the first place people went for help. So you sort of framed the whole concept of going for help. And that was especially important when you're talking about, you know, dealing with parents. And the other change that we've put in here, you know, is we really understand the idea of stigma. I think that we knew it was there intellectually, but I think the practicality of it has become more real for the adult generation, the generation of kids in school now. I would tell you, I think are much more comfortable talking about suicide. And I think there's less stigma for them, but there's still stigma for the rest of us. And when kids have to talk to adults, I think they still get scared. So one of the things that we've done is we've really incorporated the fact that we talk about safety instead of suicide, that people are not safe with themselves. Kids are not safe with themselves. So if you got a hint that a kid was a little nervous about that S word, suicide, and especially parents who could be nervous about it, we suggest just substitute the S word, safety. It's the exact same thing. You can't trust yourself with your own life. You're not safe. But rather than use that S word, suicide, it seemed to work a little bit better and it was a little easier. Parents didn't disagree automatically with the fact that you wanted their kid to be safe. Whereas if you said that their child was suicidal, you know, sometimes they're like, I don't know what kid you're talking about, but it's not my kid. So Those are, in terms of, what we're talking about, you all know, if you've been through this before, those 3 magic words. Well, essentially, they're not the magic words, tell me more, but they're your default words. And what I want you to do, just for a second, is I want you to think back to when you were a kid. And how many people in your life, when you were telling them something about something that was going on with your day, or something that was, like breaking your heart, they sat with you and said, tell me more. It was rare, wasn't it? And you probably can name the people, you can see their faces, the ones who really sat with you and listened and asked that tell me more. It's still the same, but it's even more so now. Kids aren't the only ones who are distracted by social media. We know that as adults and as parents, we're preoccupied with texting and phone and Zoom and all the rest of those. So to stop yourself and ask those 3 words, tell me more, is something most kids never hear. They can't quite believe it sometimes. And then, of course, you'll have the kids who will tell you more for an hour if you let them. But this is what opens the door to conversation, and what opens the door really to a very different kind of intervention, even with kids who've been through the system before. And those of you who were part of our prevention booster, we talked about intervention in the time of COVID. We're on the next slide, Nicole. And that's where we wanted to begin today, because we know that this has added a significant complication to everything we do. In terms of what does COVID have to do with it? Well, maybe there's a light at the end of a tunnel. We somehow thought that the vaccine was a light at the end of a tunnel. You all probably know, since I talked about the fact that I live in Dallas, and I signed up for the vaccine last week here in Texas. And in my county, I'm on a list of 120,000 people to get the vaccine. So, it's not coming real quick. We all feel that increased anxiety, chronic stress, disappointment. Just you put in the words. We would like to think that things are moving along, but between the political climate and the health climate, it really feels like we're kind of in a stuck place. Now, it's interesting because the CDC data that came out most recently talked about the fact that people are increasingly thinking about suicide, but the rate of death has actually gone down. It's actually lower. This data was done obviously in 2020, and it's actually lower than it was in 2019. But we all recognize that there is going to be a long-term impact of this, and particularly as this continues and continues and continues, the fatigue you're feeling is the same fatigue your kids are feeling. We're used to, and we learn to deal with a certain amount of change in life, but this is kind of a lot for all of us. And what we know is that for many kids, it's affecting their learning. And you're not going to see that right away. That's something that's going to sort of trickle down as time goes by. We also know that up until recently, we had done surveys with kids. We've probably surveyed over 10,000 kids around the country. And that prior to the holidays, most of the kids really felt like they were doing okay. When we surveyed the adults, they seem to be having more trouble than the kids. I'm not so sure that that's still happening. So I think we have to be careful, because I think we're beginning to start to see that negative impact on the mental health of children. But one of the things that we found when we talked to kids, even when they were feeling pretty okay, which you'll see on the next slide, was a lot of kids were worried because they didn't feel okay, that there was something wrong with them, that their mental health was deteriorating because they didn't feel great. And so I think that this is an important lesson, not just for you, but for the kids you see and their parents, is there's that mistake we make of thinking good mental health means we feel good. It's like good physical health means your body feels really good. Being mentally healthy does not mean you feel okay all the time. There's no right way to feel about all the disruptions that are going on in your life right now. But if you hit the next click, Nicole, you'll see being mentally healthy means having the right feeling at the right time and being able to cope with unpleasant feelings you have. So if you're upset and frustrated, that's probably accurate mental health. People who are walking around thinking everything is great and terrific, you might worry a little bit about where they were living. So I think this is really, really important. And what this points you in the direction of, which I know some of you have in your curriculums, your social emotional learning, is distress tolerance. Being able to cope with unpleasant feelings is distress tolerance. And as we know, most adults are kind of having difficulty with that. I think that may be one of the things that you target and you reinforce for kids. We know that the situation is definitely difficult, but for most of us, it's not devastating. So we need to think about ways that we can increase our coping and increasing our tolerance of distress. Another thing that we wanted to do, and this is also a new piece of intervention, is that Lifelines has always been trauma informed. We just never said it was because we just thought, well, that's good practice. But because of the sort of changing values in schools and the importance of having trauma informed schools, we wanted to really kind of clarify with you the relationship to intervention to what makes up trauma informed schools. This is not in the books or anything. This is all new. So that the essentials of a trauma informed school, you're going to see on the next slide. And you know this already, that there's compassionate communication. Students are empowered to act in their own agencies. There's an understanding of trauma. Safety, as I said before, is the bottom line. And I've just kind of shown you that that's what we talk about. It's focusing on strength and wellness, the importance of those social connections, and cultural sensitivity. So on the next slide, let's just take a very quick look. And I know I'm going through all this very fast, but we had a lot we wanted to jam into a 1 hour presentation. So I apologize at the speed of my conversation. Compassionate language is, we use the word, we talk about kids who are challenging. We don't use the word difficult. We talk about safety, not suicide. We talk about poor problem solving, not somebody having a mental defect or disorder. In terms of empowering students, we focus on their strengths. We totally do. And we focus on that concept of lending hope by using, as Nicole is going to tell you, those words where we join them and they don't feel so alone. In terms of understanding trauma, we put in the word suicide there, although suicide is definitely a trauma. And we use a wellness-based, not a medical diagnostic model, which again are what some of those other adult-based programs are bringing to your schools. We're not bringing that. Promoting safety goes without saying, and focusing on strengths, building relationships. We focus not just on kids, but also on those social connections in the classroom, and also what they can get with their families, which is why we've done as many programs for parents and caregivers as we have for teachers. And then, of course, that cultural sensitivity, we really try to keep the focus on the feelings and not in specifically how a particular culture responds to something. We continue to use the same definition of suicide we used before, which is the behavioral definition, which is simple, clear, and it doesn't make suicidal thinking into a character defect. It's not you're too sensitive, what baby you are, grow up. It's an attempt to solve a problem that's causing intense emotional pain with problem-solving skills that are impaired. We also want to just kind of clue you in terms of the language of suicide, because again, as the field grows, more and more people who've experienced suicide loss in their family remind us that saying committed suicide really does feel like we're making a value judgment against their beloved person who died. So we really suggest that you use died by suicide. A successful attempt is like successful an accomplishment, and dying by suicide doesn't feel like an accomplishment. So just pay attention to it. You're going to still say it if you say committed, because it's kind of in the vernacular. But if you just kind of try to catch yourself, you eventually can move to saying somebody died by suicide. And we know that permanent solution to a temporary problem, that's designed to make us feel better. It's not designed to make anybody else feel better. And you know yourself, when you're sitting in the middle of a problem and someone says, oh, it's just temporary, doesn't make you feel good at all. So we want to make sure that we don't give that cliche. That's what it is. We want to recognize that at the time, the person and the kid is feeling like they're pretty overwhelmed. The characteristics of suicide, we haven't changed those at all. And as I just said, we perceive it as an alternative to a problem that the youth feels is totally unsolvable. They can't think of any other way. In the second edition, we really do go into tunnel thinking. And for those of you who are familiar with the 5th and 6th grade curriculum, we actually teach tunnel thinking, which is very similar to cognitive constriction if you're applying this to, you know, some cognitive behavioral techniques. But we teach kids how to do that and how to see when their problem solving goes from helpful to unhelpful. We don't even use the word healthy to unhealthy. We don't want that. Again, is the language that we're looking at. You were doing things that were helpful. These aren't so helpful now. And how do you bounce yourself back up? We know that anytime you're feeling overwhelmed and you have a problem you can't solve, you're in a crisis. And your thinking in a crisis isn't as clear. It comes from the limbic system of your brain. It does not come from the prefrontal lobe. So we know that it's emotional thinking. And especially, it doesn't even matter, because we know we do it as adults, kids do it too. And you got to pull yourself down to the developmental level they've regressed to be able to meet them there, to pull them back up. The idea of ambivalence, we know what that means, basically, is that if somebody just wanted to die, they'd be dead. Ambivalence means there's a part of them that still wants to live, and that's the part that you're really engaging with. That's the part you're joining with. Now, the thing I would tell you about ambivalence is you've got to be careful, because we all want to see someone suicidal feeling better, don't we? And we think, oh, thank God they're better. We don't have to worry anymore. It's just the positive side of that ambivalence. We need to keep our eyes open. And, the saddest stories I know are families who had a suicidal child and had something happen, like they were planning a vacation together and the child was engaged in the discussions about it. And then later that evening, the child took their life. So you got to just be careful not to just get so excited when it turns to positive that you lose the reality that that other side is still there. That irrational quality to problem solving, to think that death is a solution to a life problem, shows that you're really kind of in a logical sort of frame. And it's really, really important for us to remember, when someone is illogical, you know this, because you can't talk to kids who are telling you things that make no sense by saying, well, wait a minute, here's the reality. You can't go there. You got to go a different way. And we also know that suicide is a form of communication. So let's take a look very quickly at what you do related to all of these characteristics. And again, we've emphasized this more in the updated version, I think, than we did in the previous one, because we want you to know that just in doing that assessment in your office, you are beginning intervention. You may be doing more of an intervention than they get the next place they go if you send them on, truthfully. But in terms of that alternative, you simply ask them, what's going on in your life right now that has you feel so terrible you wish you were dead? There it is. You're coming to the problem, not the character defect. For crisis intervention, we know that you ventilate, you let them talk about how they feel, and you validate those feelings. And we're going to practice that in a little bit. In terms of ambivalence, again, you validate, but you lend hope. And Nicole is going to tell you just simple ways to do this, because again, we've been in your shoes. we know what it's like to have to do something quickly. And what I will tell you is, as a private practice therapist for a gazillion years, I would often hear people complain that they'd been to other people. I sometimes was the last stop on the road. They'd been to other people and they never felt like they got anything. So it's really important when you see a kid, even for 5 minutes, that they leave with one little piece of information or one little piece of something they can hold on to. And hope is that. In terms of reality testing, irrationality, we do reality testing. And what that means is you got to give them a part of yourself that says, look, there are things to live for. There's something out there. We can find it if we work on this together. And finally, when you get to that whole thing about communication, you have to ask, what's the message you want to send? Who are you sending it to? What are you trying to communicate here? And you'll be kind of surprised at the answers that kids give you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn this over to our school counselor, Nicole, who's going to give you specific interventions for the things I've given you some of the theory base for. So go to it, Nicole.
All right. So good morning, guys. We got through a lot. I'm looking at the clock in my office, and we got through a lot of content in the first 27 minutes of being together this morning. And so I want to kind of take a pause here and come up for air and invite you guys to kind of chat with me or ask a question. And before I get into some of the things that are going to help us do intervention, I want to know what's going on in your schools that are making intervention so challenging right now. I think the obvious one is obviously that there's a lot of virtual in school versus virtual type things. But I think as we're coming into the better half of the school year here, I think that, as Maureen said before, certainly for us, when we came back to school, didn't really see the deterioration of the mental health of our students so much. It was more so, maintaining the self-care of the adult. But now we're sort of seeing that long-term effect, that COVID and quarantining and all of these different things are having on our kids, and obviously I'm in a younger school setting, but interesting to see what you guys are seeing in the high schools. I know a lot of the high schools have had a harder time, staying open, especially due to, non-cohorting of kids and kids just being together and things like that. But in terms of intervention, what are you guys seeing? I'm seeing a lot of I'm seeing an increase certainly in anxiety. And while I saw that in the beginning, now I'm starting to see some high levels of anxiety. I'm starting to see more panic and more things that really warrant an outside referral. I'm seeing kids really, we're talking a lot about New Year's resolutions, even in clients that I see outside of school. And the resolutions are COVID for a year, and realistically for our kids, that's not something that's going to, happen. And reframing that resolutions are things that we can do, and certainly things that we can try to do to remain COVID free ourselves. But that's a big piece that's out of control. And at the end of the day, what I usually say to kids is, what is anxiety in and of itself? It's just feeling completely out of control and, having these thoughts that, take us away from where we really want to be. So I'm interested to see what you guys are seeing as well. And, I'll check the chat throughout my, time here in the morning so we can kind of have this, back and forth conversation about how intervention is going to be meaningful to you guys. Lending hope. I mean, I don't know about you. I've lent hope, probably more than I ever have, in the past several months. And in coming back to school and in staying at home, using those joining words to really not let kids feel like they're alone in this. Some kids are stuck at home with their families and they've never felt further apart from those family members than they do right now, just because of the tension of maybe parents working from home, them being in school, brothers and sisters, and all of these different things that are actually further isolating them due to the responsibilities and the anxiety that they're having relating to having to stay home. So like I said, using those joining words, let's put our heads together and figure this out. Let's see what we can come up with. Even when I come up with a plan here for kids who, have a behavioral challenge, an academic, emotional issues that they're struggling with, whatever I do, it's, we create this plan together. And I'm going to check on you and I'm going to follow up with you and we're going to see what we're doing. I tell them about, what I call my training wheels. Like right now you got the training wheels, which is I'm helping you come up with this plan, but in a few weeks, you're going to come up with your own plan. You're going to give it back to me because we're going to continue to work on this. Always lending hope as much as possible in that way and trying to make any type of connection at this point. I'm going to move on to my next slide because it goes right into my next thought, which is, providing reality testing. A lot of what we have that goes on with kids who are definitely feeling suicidal is they have these reasons that want to die, which, as Maureen said, connects to that characteristic of suicide, which is illogical. So how do we bring them back? What are the reasons you want to live? No answers are wrong. And what I usually say to people is it doesn't matter whether this is based in reality or this is a student's perception. At some time, a student's perception when they're anxious enough or when they're thinking about wanting to die becomes their reality, even if it's not our reality. So we can't, talk to them in a way that says those trite, kind of comments that Maureen was talking about, really asking them, okay, so you want to die. What are the reasons that you want to live? And now you guys have been through Lifelines before. So, when we do that activity, where would you rather be? And we have a kid who says, I wouldn't rather be anywhere. I'd rather be dead. That's a kid that you need to have assessed that day. But what I'm really finding in a lot of assessments that I've done recently or that I've consulted with or I've helped people through is that kids really do have reasons to live right now. And it goes back to that data that Maureen talked to you about. Ideation is certainly up, but those that death number is kind of, dropping because people have reasons to live and they remember them. It's just that we're not able to do some of them right now, right? So what are the reasons you want to live? Because I love to play lacrosse, or I love to play club volleyball, or I love to do this activity, or perform, or be with these friends, or see my friends that, are across the country, and I can't do that right now. So using those joining words and coming up with ways to kind of replace those things until we are able to do them again, and maintaining the hope that we're going to be able to do those things again, right? That's what I'm really seeing. No answers are wrong. So if somebody comes out of left field and tells you something crazy, okay, that's a reason to live though. And you're going to latch onto that and you're going to create a reason for that child to continue living. And you're going to also participate in that. If it's something that you've never heard of before, I have the kids educate me on it. If it's anime, if it's a TV show, if it's being creative, we're going to certainly do that thing together. Even if it's that 15 minutes that I get to check in with them, and 15 minutes is a lot right now, but I make that time for that kid, especially if I'm worried about them. Those are the reasons they want to live. Okay, they sound pretty awesome. Teach me about them, because now they have a second reason to live, which is they're teaching you about their reasons to live, which is engaging them. How'd I ask about the message, right? Who do you want to send your suicide as a message to? A lot of the time, I see this come across as anger. So I open up the conversation and I say, you seem pretty angry right now. I use that validation piece, right? You're angry about something and it seems like there's something you want to tell somebody, but you're too angry to right now. So what is that message? Especially for the kids who are younger, maybe have some, communication issues, talking about suicide might, using that S word again may shut down the conversation. Anger usually opens up that conversation. I can't tell you the number of times that I've said, you seem pretty angry right now. And the kid either will, yeah, okay, I am pretty angry right now. And they're not going to go any further. I said, listen, I understand that you're angry. I've had a lot of angry kids in my office before. That always gets an eyebrow. You have? I said, yeah. I said, before I worked here, when I worked in other places, your angry is a lot different. I can handle your angry, right? We can talk about this together. I said, I've had kids throw chairs through windows. That's always an icebreaker, right? We talk about that situation, where I've had a kid be that angry. And I said, I was able to help him in the end, figure out why he was so angry. He doesn't throw chairs anymore. And I'm pretty sure that I can help you figure out why you're so angry and what that message is that you want to be, and figure out a way to keep you here on earth by getting that message across to whoever it is that you need to. Again, it's all about that joining, that piece of bringing it in. Like, you told me the secret. You're not alone in the secret anymore. You and me are together, and we're going to figure out what to do about it. Right? I've pretty much been tying this theme in through my last couple of slides, but that ventilation and that validation piece, which is truly so hard. And I want to come up again for some air here in this moment and kind of talk about it. Us as adults, we're exhausted. These things that we're doing here daily in schools, sometimes we're doing things that our direct responsibility in our positions as counselors and social workers, nurses and psychologists. administration, and sometimes they're not. We're on the front lines right now. We may have, some staffing issues. You may have some other things that you get pulled into, and that's taking away your peace as a person to lend a bit of yourself. So I want to take a minute and just have you guys reflect on how hard it is to validate right now, because for some of us, it's hard to validate ourselves. So this is that self-care work that really comes into play with intervention, and was something that I really wanted to discuss this morning. Is in order for us to allow somebody to ventilate and validate, we really need to be doing a lot of that work on our own. And some of us are really good at self-care, some of us struggle, but even more so now as we come into, the second half of the year after the break, moving into, some bigger pieces here, and really this 1 year anniversary of kind of, being in this position with our students. You're not going to be able to validate for anybody if you can't validate for yourself. So that being said, you have a long day and it's 2:00, because it always seems to be the case, and you get a kid that comes into your office that tells you, something that rubs your gut, and you say, I have to ask this question. And they do, and they tell you that they're feeling so hopeless that they think about dying, or they think about wanting to end their life. How do you validate that student? And I just want you to take a moment here, and I want you to think about what comes into your mind as to how you would validate that student. And sometimes it's not an immediate validation comment, right? You have a kid who comes in and kind of blurts that information out. Well, all right, you're feeling some pretty heavy stuff right now. What is making you feel so hopeless that you want to die? Take those couple of minutes, use that tell me more, and figure out in your head how you're going to validate for them. And sometimes, especially right now, with all we feel about COVID and being back in school and working and our own things, you may be able to say, I can really understand why you might be feeling that way right now. And then you use those joining words and you come in. But most of our kids at this point have had the excuse of COVID kind of rammed down their throats. Like, oh, okay, everybody feels this way because of COVID. No, not everybody feels so hopeless that they want to die. Some kids are doing a really good job at coping, and some are really not. And that's our responsibility into schools, to help the ones that are not coping well. So, especially at this point, I think for some of our older kids, especially, you got 8th graders, you got seniors, who last year we worried and we said, oh, this is so sad for those guys. And my gut told me it was going to be much sadder for this year, for these kids who really were not, at least last year, some of those kids got sports. Some of these kids got, holiday things that they were able to do, or other, graduating type of traditions that they held on to. That's a lot to validate, and a lot of the times is saying, I can't imagine how it is being a senior, getting ready to go off into college and having none of the traditions that give you closure on, this big piece of your life. Figure out how you would validate for those kids really missing some of these lifetime milestones right now. Right? So as I said, and I'm going to just kind of tie this in here, ventilation sounds like the person being able to talk fully and freely without interruption. Don't problem solve. It is in our guts and inherently what we want to do. You don't want to feel like that. You don't want to die. You have so much to live for. Sometimes kids have even been told, COVID's going to be over soon. The vaccine is out. We don't know yet. We certainly don't know what the future looks like. And while we're hopeful, it doesn't change how this person is feeling right now. Don't interrupt. Allow them to speak. Let them to do that ventilation piece first, and then follow up with the validation. You focus on the other person. You're mindful of who is doing the most talking. You don't rush them. Again, that piece that I said before of not trying to solve the problem, and you're focusing on the emotions, how they're feeling: angry, sad, upset, hopeless, lost, confused. Okay, somebody comes to you and says, I keep thinking about jumping out that attic window. Don't say that. It's not high enough to kill you. You'll feel differently later. You keep thinking about jumping out the attic window. What's making you think about that? You're validating. Wow, what's going on in your life right now may make you feel desperate. Is that something that you're feeling? I always ask a kid to correct me if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, but from what you're saying, it sounds like you might be feeling really desperate. And that's that open piece, right? Because either they're going to say, yes, yes, you got it. I am feeling desperate. And I'm like, maybe I'm not feeling so desperate. Maybe it's a little bit more lost. Let's talk about that some more. Humanity is so self-serving. I hate everyone. Invalidating, you're always complaining. Do you really think you have it that bad? I feel that way right now too. Again, jabbing this whole thing that everybody's going through this right now. Validating. Sounds like you are feeling pretty alone and left out. Why don't you tell me more about that? Who is everyone? Who is everybody that you hate so much right now? Hate's a pretty strong word. Tell me more about what hate is like for you. I use that a lot too. And when I validate for kids, a quick question is like, hate looks a little different to everybody. So tell me what hate looks like for you. Because hate for me, I'm just ghosting somebody on my phone. I'm not talking to them ever again. Hate for somebody else is like, they're having a fight in the hallway. What is hate like for you? Wow, that sounds like you feel pretty alone and left out. Having that engaging joining piece where you're asking for more clarification on what it is that they're feeling. Again, that we like to talk in words of three, so your default response is always tell me more. I will tell you again, especially now, feeling a little burnt out maybe, you have a day where, you've already done an assessment in the morning, now you have another one that you have to do in the afternoon, you're trying to figure things out, you're a little spent. Tell me more buys you time. So you listen to that kid, you get your game plan in your head, and you say, how am I going to validate this kid? And how am I going to move them towards an out of school assessment when they need it? Intervention. Can you assess suicide risk virtually? What do you guys think? How have you guys been doing it? Yeah, so one of the things that's coming across is, we aren't as in touch with our students while we're working remotely. Usually hearing about a crisis after they occurred. Speaking to that from, an administrative level, like figuring out how you're going to gameplay that, making sure that people are not just, like Maureen said before, I think the biggest piece is like, we're in crisis mode. So people make decisions, things are happening, and then we don't find out about it, whether it's in your own school or whether it's, it happened to the kid outside of school and the family took care of it on its own. That's a big piece that we've always dealt with, right? Is that these things happen and then parents don't communicate with schools, whereas we can really, really help support that kid coming back, knowing what actually happened while they were absent. But being in touch as much as possible. I cannot tell you the amount of letters and, reinforcements that I've sent to our parents at home, reminding them how to gain access to me remotely. I do a lot of remote sessions with my kids, whereas I didn't do that last spring. We were kind of thrown into the situation, didn't really have the structure to build that. There are some kids that I have really built a strong relationship with remotely. I have time in their day, either they have a lunch break or something where the kids here are doing something in school and they're not, and I'm able to contact them. In one of our earlier trainings, I talked about really having that emergency go kit with you where you have information readily available about your remote students, like right next to you. So whenever I do remote sessions with kids, the first thing I talk about is like, I'm letting your parents know, we're doing this together, kind of use those joint words to bring everybody into a place. And then I'm contacting the parents to let them know that I'm working remotely. And then I have that backup plan. Kid logs off, got like as of right now hasn't happened, but I have my emergency plan, and then for situations that I've been in where the crisis has occurred after, and I heard, I found out who the key players were. I went to them, I talked to them, I said, this is what it's got to be next time. I said, you have to include me. There's a transition of care right now. One of the things I think, and nurses, if you're on this call that you can attest to, is we have this rule right now that anybody who has any type of complaint is COVID presumed positive, right? So if I have a kid that I know I'm working with and they're super anxious and they have belly aches and they go to the nurse instead of coming to my office, they're sent home, right? They have to be medically cleared in order to come back to school because we're in this orange zone of risk right now. Whereas that was what was happening to me. I was finding out about the panic attack or the crisis after the fact. So we went and we spoke and we figured out a way to kind of like have this information share. Yeah, sometimes right now a kid gets shortness of breath from a panic or something like that, and I'm dealing another crisis on in the school, yeah, that kid's got to get sent home. But after that crisis has occurred, I know it's not the last panic attack for that kid in the school. Contact the family, contact the nurses, the teachers. If we see similar behavior, now they know to get that kid to me, level 1, so I can assess whether or not they're actually sick or they're having a somatic complaint of their anxiety or something else that's going on in school. Yeah, incredibly important for school social workers and the nurses to be working together right now. I would say that's a huge, huge piece for this intervention. Knowing whether or not this is a somatic complaint and knowing whether or not this is an actual, possible risk for COVID in your school building, especially if you guys are back into. And so that's a little piece of what we've been experiencing and what I've talked with some other people about, what I've talked to some school nurses about. So I would say try to build up that team of there's going to be some crises that you get left out of. How do we decrease that? How do we increase the probability that we're helping our kids as much as possible? Assessing potentially at-risk students, kind of some of the things that I went through before. Create that procedure statement about virtual process, circulate to your parents and your caregivers as soon as possible. Let them know that this is something that may happen. If they log off, you may have to call the local police. You may have to call the nearest hospital. You have backup emergency information. You have mom's number. You have somebody else that you can contact. A lot of schools, you guys already have this, but having it ready to go, just making sure that the parents and the kids know what that would look like in case it has to happen. The process of assessment, is it similar to in person? If you're in school, you try to do it as much as possible the same way. Update your community referral list. Absolutely. I don't know about you guys, but everybody's booked. Everybody out of network, outside of school, private practice, certainly insurance. I am finding a really hard time finding good matches for people who are able to take on more clients at this point. I think that speaks to the mental health of our kids and our community in general during this crisis, but really updating that community list and making sure you have something to go. I've gotten in the practice of making sure that I'm in contact with the hospital. It seems to be that sometimes the policies are changing here and there, especially from hospital to hospital. Some people are doing telehealth. Some people prefer that they come in. I always check to see if the family has insurance, if they still have insurance. A lot of people have lost their jobs or decreased their hours and all of those different things. So I just try to maintain as much information in advance as possible when I'm working with a student. Okay, let's see. For virtual assessments, you need to remember you may need to engage with the parents before the student. Typically, that's not how you would like to do it, but if you're worried or you get a tip, let's say somebody in school says, hey, I really need you to check in on my friend. They're not doing well. Reach out to the parents first and say, hey, this is a referral that we got. I would like to meet remotely with your student. I will follow up immediately after. Really kind of lay that out. I've gotten a lot of self-referrals for kids from parents directly. So that obviously parent communication has already been there in the first place. Have your data in order. You have those behaviorally specific observations. You guys have been through Lifelines, so you know this. Come with the data, because a kid is always going to say, nope, I feel fine. And we can say, hey, well, you showed up 3 times late. You didn't log on 4 times in a row for, this one specific class. This really isn't like you. Maybe you see, those changes, those facts, those feelings, actions, changes, threats, and situations. You come with that and you have that ready to present to that kid so that they feel a little bit more seen, right? They want to keep this secret. They want to feed into that anxiety that they shouldn't tell anybody how it is that they feel. But you've noticed things about you physically that have changed that indicate to us that there's something else going on. And maybe let's talk about that. You may choose to refer out for more complete assessment more often. 100% agreed. Right now, really not taking the risk, again, not risking our licenses, anything of that, just kind of comes down to it. I don't have the time to assess some kids that I would have in the past, or maybe it's the end of the day, or maybe I've got 3 assessments going on at once. These are things that may be coming across to you guys in your schools. And, you may just feel more comfortable assessing out than spending the time, the resources that you don't have in school right now to do it yourself in a way that you would. So you need to update your referral protocols. I've done that. I've sat with my administration and made sure that everybody's aware. The other piece of this, right, is you guys aren't invincible too. there is a chance that you are going to get sick. What is the policy? What is the protocol for when you're not here? And make sure that your team knows that. Do that in advance. Have a mini meeting if you're able to, and say, here, write it down. Like, here's what I would call, here's what I would do, here's how I would do it. Walk them through that in case you're not able to be there because you're either remote yourself, you're quarantining, or, I hope that everybody stays safe and healthy. But, in case you're out, you need a backup plan as well. Documentation is super essential. I don't have to say more than that. You guys know, cover your butts here and make sure that you have everything that you need, just in case. Tips for talking with upset students in person or virtually. I always start with breathing prompts or kind of trying to bring them down. I validate those feelings, that upsetness, whatever it is that they're going on. Start with that validation. I can't help you fix the feeling of I wish I were dead, but I can help you fix the problems that make you want to feel that way. Find out what the problem is and create a classroom action plan. What does that look like? So maybe you've referred them out. Maybe they're not going to be in school for a couple of days. You talk to the parents, wraparound approach. We've included administration. We've included parents. We've included this child. The other piece for this, like talking with upset students, if they know that it's going in a direction, I walk them through what this process is going to look like, especially in COVID. I did it before, but now due to all of the unknowns, I kind of tell them like, hey, listen, we're going to be in this together. There's a couple of things that may be unknown about this, but here's what you should expect, and I always validate for them. You were so truthful with me today. And I cannot thank you enough because it must have been so incredibly hard for you to walk in that door and tell me what it is that you told me. And I'm going to need you to do something for me. I'm going to need you, wherever I send you for this assessment, you need to be just as truthful with them as you were for me, because we all know that that's the biggest piece, right? Once they leave your office, they have a couple of hours to think. They know how to answer those questions. They know how to sometimes manipulate the situation to get out of a hospital where they change completely. Nope, I don't feel that way. I don't do it. And then they come back and they're upset that they did it, or, they're angry. Getting that buy-in early and saying to them, you may meet with somebody who doesn't validate you the way that I just did, or, you may be upset, or mom may be in the room, but I need you to do this piece for me because I'm trying to keep you safe. I know you want to be safe. I know you want to come back to school. We talked about all those reasons that you have for living. And because of those, I need you to go and be truthful in that assessment. That's that joining, right? That piece of, I helped you today, you got to help me. And all together, this is going to help us keep you safe and keep you here and keep you alive. So we're wrapping up a little bit. We went through a lot of content today. What questions, comments do you guys have? What kind of stuff do we have going on? What do you guys think? I say, there's an increased risk for virtual students. Why aren't we all convincing our superintendents to be in school hybrid versus 100% virtual? I know that's a big challenge, right? And as somebody, I don't know how much I can speak on that because I'm kind of, I'm in a different boat. We are here in person. I do have some, people, that I work with outside of school that have a lot of kids who are 100% virtual or going back and forth between that hybrid. It's definitely some challenging times, and we're seeing a different piece here as we move forward in this COVID crisis. Maureen, what do you think?
I think that question is the same question that we have in the larger context, because I think we can't just take school and see it as a little island. Our whole society, our whole culture is, are we hybrid? Are we virtual? Are we in quarantine? And it shifts and it changes. So I think that part of what our responsibility is, and it's hard to do, we have to do it with ourselves first, is come to terms with the uncertainty of it. And the fact that while it may not be the best, it's keeping people alive. And we have to figure out how to keep them mentally healthy and focus on that piece.
Yeah. What other questions do you guys have? I know that this was, the session that a lot of you guys wanted to attend. We had a lot of questions about, how to do intervention. It was a really brief overview of what Lifelines has already taught you guys previously. So I know you're coming in with some really good base knowledge, of what we've taught you guys before. But anything you think we should know moving forward? Like Maureen and I always say, what you guys teach us in these sessions educates how we alter and how we update and how we evolve Lifelines. So your input is incredibly valuable to us.
And, if you feel like it's hard to chat it in because your thoughts are a little bit more complex, please contact us, because we're continuing to do these. We do these all over the country. And, we feel that your voices are part of what other people need to hear. So I just want to reinforce what Nicole is saying, because I do believe, again, this is an evolving situation and you're going to need other skill sets, or maybe you just need some support for yourself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't know about you guys, but rolling out to that break and then coming back into school, that was rough for me. That was rough, having those 2 weeks off and then coming back into school. And, I didn't realize for myself how on the ground and how essential we were. And so, trying to take that self-care, so that I can intervene. And I think so that I can really lend a lot of myself to what my students need. I really need to figure out, some ways to fill my cup. And I've been fortunate enough to, do that last week. But it was a real big surprise to me how having those 2 weeks off really impacted me. So I urge you guys to do some self-care, even if you think you're doing okay. It hits us sometimes in ways that we weren't, And I think in the beginning of the call, Maureen had mentioned, we're both LCSWs in ways that our world has kind of, derailed some of the stuff. I'm still an LSW, waiting on that, paperwork and stuff like that. I know. So, this has derailed our lives in some ways, whether it's career wise, whether it's family based, emotionally, growth wise. Maybe this isn't where we thought we would be. We really lost a whole year to achieve something. So all of that self-care stuff, guys. But I don't see any questions coming through. Checking the Q&A. So we will let you guys get going. I know that you have a super busy day at your schools and your buildings.
And we have the post test to put up, Nicole.
Yes, we have the post test. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Just a reminder, everything here is provided from the Mental Health Association of Monmouth County. We've received a very, great grant from the freeholders to continue to do this work. They value what it is that we've done so far with Lifelines. So this data is going to be super, super important for us to collect. And you guys are helping us bring in the funds to continue to turn them around back into your schools. I hope you guys all have a great day. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put up the post test into the chat for you guys to do. We will also email that out in a little bit. I love to see some of these familiar names and faces as they're coming across here. I hope you guys are all doing well. And thank you for your kind comments. That certainly helps us continue on with our very stressful day too. I appreciate all of you guys, all of our Lifeline schools for what you're doing and for keeping our kids safe. And we'll get through, like I said, we'll get through this together, and we'll be back. We have another training coming up at the end of February. I believe that's February 22nd. If you guys haven't already signed up for the full Lifelines days of training that we have coming up in the next 2 weeks or so, contact me. I just emailed you all with all that information. So we're really super happy to continue to provide this stuff. And like I said, you guys need a question, get me by email. I'm always ready and available to help you guys as much as possible, or anything that you guys think that we should be thinking about, especially as we come towards this 1-year anniversary of COVID. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a great day, and stay happy as much as possible and safe.
Thank you all. We'll see you soon.
Bye.